I had never been one to take shortcuts, but there I was in the middle of nowhere, at the edge of a dense forest, looking at the faint path that seemed to disappear into the trees. It had been a spur-of-the-moment decision, really. I had been driving for hours on a long, winding highway, trying to make my way to a remote camping spot I had found online. The plan had been simple: find the spot, set up camp, and enjoy a few peaceful days away from everything. But things never go according to plan, do they? It was late afternoon by the time I turned off the main road and onto a dirt trail that led deeper into the woods. The GPS on my phone had been glitching for the past half hour, and there were no other cars around. I wasn't exactly in the middle of nowhere yet, but I could tell I was getting closer. I passed a few old cabins. Some looked abandoned. Others seemed lived in, but with no signs of life. As I continued down the road, the trees seemed to close in on both sides, their dense foliage blocking out the last bit of sunlight. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but the place had an eerie feeling to it. Not that it was dangerous, just off. The trees were too quiet, and the air felt thicker than it should have. I pulled my car up to a clearing just big enough for a tent, parked, and grabbed my gear. I hadn't seen anyone for miles. The isolation was what drew me to this spot in the first place. But now, with no one around, I felt strangely exposed. I set up my tent with the usual routine, staked it down, unfurled my sleeping bag, arranged the firewood I'd brought with me. There wasn't much to the place. The clearing was small, and aside from the tall trees, all I could see was the edge of the forest and the narrow trail that led back to the dirt road. There wasn't any noise either. No wind, no birds, nothing. It was quiet, too quiet. I decided to start a fire. The evening chill had begun creeping in, and the crackle of flames would at least give me something to focus on. I sat on a log beside the fire, staring at the flames and wondering if this had been such a good idea after all. My phone still had no signal, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was probably just my imagination, I thought, but the feeling wouldn't go away. As night settled in, I did my best to ignore the unsettling stillness around me. I ate a quick dinner from a can and tried to read a book by the light of the fire. But my eyes kept darting to the tree line, and the shadows between the trunks seemed to shift unnaturally. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off, like I was being drawn deeper into the woods without meaning to. I shook my head, forcing myself to focus on the pages of my book, but I couldn't concentrate. The unease gnawed at me, growing with each passing minute. It was then that I heard it, an unmistakable sound just beyond the trees, a rustling noise. At first, I thought it was an animal, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. It didn't sound like a bear or a deer or any of the usual wildlife I was used to. It sounded human, like someone was walking slowly through the underbrush, trying to stay quiet. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. The noise stopped as soon as I moved. I stared into the darkness, my eyes straining to make out any shapes in the trees. I couldn't see anything, just shadows and movement in the corners of my vision. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of pine. My hands were shaking now, and I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from fear. I had come out here for solitude, but now I wanted nothing more than to be back in the city, surrounded by people, noise, and light. The rustling came again. This time it was closer. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and shone it toward the trees. Nothing, just the shadows. My breath quickened, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I turned the flashlight off again, trying to stay calm. It was probably an animal, I told myself. A deer, a raccoon, something. There was no reason to panic. But then the rustling came again, this time from directly behind me. I froze. The sound was unmistakable now, and it was close, too close. My heart thudded in my chest, and I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. Then, In the space of a few seconds, everything went silent. It was as if the world had stopped. I waited, barely breathing, listening for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. I dared a glance over my shoulder. The clearing was empty. My eyes flicked from the trees to the shadows, my mind racing with possibilities. Had I imagined it? No, I knew what I'd heard. The silence stretched on. Then, I heard a faint crunch underfoot. It was barely audible, but it was there. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but again, nothing. The trail that led back to the road seemed just as empty as it had been before. I don't know how long I stood there, my heart pounding, my breath shallow. Maybe it was minutes, maybe it was hours. But eventually, I knew I had to do something. I wasn't going to sit here waiting for whatever it was to come closer. I grabbed my things, shoved them into my backpack, and moved quickly to my car. The whole time, I kept looking over my shoulder. Every rustle, every shift of the trees sent a jolt of fear through me. But I couldn't see anyone, couldn't hear anyone. When I finally reached the car, I threw my bag in the back seat, got in, and locked the doors. I stared out the window, my heart still racing, waiting for whatever had been out there to reveal itself. But the darkness remained undisturbed. I wasn't sure what to do next. Should I just leave? Should I wait until morning? But the thought of staying in that clearing for another night felt impossible. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I started the engine and drove back down the dirt trail. As I left the forest behind, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. The further I got from that place, the less I felt like I was being watched. When I reached the main road, I didn't stop to look back. I kept driving, trying to ignore the eerie stillness of the forest that seemed to follow me, even from miles away. By the time I reached a small town and found a place to stay for the night, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. Was it someone playing a prank on me? Or had I just stumbled across a spot that people preferred to keep to themselves? Either way, I had learned something important that night. No matter how remote the place, how peaceful it may seem, there's always a chance that someone or something else is out there. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something, though I could never quite put my finger on what it was. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going back to that spot. Ever. I had always liked the idea of solitude. It was part of the reason I went out to the remote cabin in the middle of nowhere that weekend. I wanted a break from the constant noise and chaos of everyday life. No phones ringing, no emails, no pressure. Just me, nature, and a quiet little cabin tucked deep in the woods. I found it through an online rental site, a place so isolated that the nearest neighbor was miles away. Perfect, I thought. This would be the reset I needed. The road to the cabin was rough, barely wide enough for my car. I passed through dense trees, feeling like I was entering another world with every turn. The last stretch of the road was more like a trail, and I had to park the car and hike a little before I finally reached the cabin. It looked exactly as I imagined, sitting there on the edge of a small, quiet clearing, surrounded by towering pines and thick underbrush. No one else in sight. It was almost too perfect. Inside, the cabin was small but cozy. A single bedroom with a soft bed, a small kitchen with just enough to cook a meal, and a living room with a fireplace. The wooden beams on the ceiling creaked as I settled in, and the only sound outside was the wind whispering through the trees. I felt at peace, finally free from the stress of the outside world. The first day went by uneventfully. I went for a walk through the woods, breathing in the fresh air and enjoying the quiet. The forest around me was thick, so much so that I couldn't see much beyond a few feet in front of me. It was beautiful, though, the kind of beauty that made you feel small but connected to something much bigger than yourself. I found a small stream, sat by it for a while, and listened to the water trickling over the rocks. That night, as the sun set, the temperature dropped. I sat in front of the fire with a cup of tea, watching the flickering flames. The cabin was warm and inviting, the perfect refuge from the cool night outside. I had the place to myself, and that was all that mattered. But around midnight, something strange happened. At first, it was just a noise in the distance, something that caught my attention. It sounded like something large moving through the trees. I stood still for a moment, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, but it was hard to tell. The forest was so thick, and the shadows made it hard to see anything clearly. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just a deer or a bear, I thought. The animals around here could be loud when they moved through the brush. Then I heard it again, closer this time. A heavy rustling, like something big was pushing through the underbrush. I listened intently, my heart beginning to race a little. It was so quiet here, and the sound seemed out of place. It wasn't a bear, or at least it didn't sound like one. Bears don't move like that. I grabbed a flashlight from the counter and stepped outside, standing on the porch for a moment, listening. The wind had died down, and the forest was eerily still. The noise had stopped, but the feeling of being watched settled over me. I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. I called out into the darkness, my voice breaking the silence, but there was no response. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches swaying just slightly, as if they were trying to hide something. I shone the flashlight into the woods, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. But all I saw was the darkness, the beam of light dancing over the trunks of trees. I stood there for a few moments, unsure of what to do. Should I go inside and lock the door? Should I wait and see if the noise returned? I decided to head back inside, but as I turned to go, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The footprints. There were fresh prints in the soft earth just outside the cabin, large and heavy, like a person had been standing there not long ago. I froze, the flashlight trembling in my hand. These weren't animal tracks. They were human, or at least they looked like they could be. But there was no one for miles around. No one at all. I quickly bolted the door behind me and locked the windows, my mind racing. Who would be out here? And why were they so close to the cabin? The possibility of someone being out there watching me made my skin crawl. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just someone else staying nearby, or maybe the tracks had been there longer than I thought. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The prints were fresh, and they led straight up to the cabin. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin, every shift of the wind outside, had me jumping. I sat up in bed, the flashlight on the nightstand beside me, my eyes flicking to the windows every few seconds. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional crackling from the fireplace. At some point, I must have drifted off to sleep, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the first light of dawn. I felt groggy and disoriented, but also relieved. It was daylight and I had survived the night. But the moment I stepped outside, my stomach dropped again. The prints, they were still there, and they weren't just by the cabin. They were everywhere, leading away into the woods, disappearing into the trees. It was like whoever had been here had walked around the entire cabin during the night, circling it, watching, waiting. My first instinct was to grab my things and leave, get in the car and drive away as fast as I could. But something held me back. What if I was wrong? What if there was an explanation? I had to know. I had to figure out who or what was out there. I spent the rest of the morning trying to make sense of it all. I followed the tracks, though they grew fainter as I went deeper into the woods. They were human, I was sure of it, but they seemed to disappear in odd places. The forest was dense, and it was hard to see anything too far ahead. Around midday, I found something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A small clearing. In the center was a makeshift camp, the kind that looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. There were a few charred logs, a small tent that had been ripped open, and a few empty cans scattered around. But what caught my attention was the pack. A backpack, lying abandoned on the ground, just a few feet from the fire pit. It was old, worn out, and covered in dirt, but it was unmistakable. I approached cautiously, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. This was real. Someone had been out here. Someone had been close to the cabin. I opened the pack carefully, my fingers trembling. Inside, I found only a few supplies. A water bottle, some granola bars, and a map. But the map wasn't of the area I was in. It was an old topographic map, showing places I didn't recognize, roads that didn't exist anymore, and markings that seemed out of place. My heart raced. Whoever had been out here was preparing for something big. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to stay and figure it out, but my instincts screamed at me to leave, to get back to my car and never look back. That's exactly what I did. I didn't waste any more time. I grabbed the backpack and headed back toward the cabin, my thoughts running wild. What did this mean? Who was out there? And why hadn't they come back for their stuff? I packed my things as quickly as I could, barely taking the time to make sure I had everything. I didn't care about the cabin anymore. I just needed to get out. I drove away, not once looking back. As I left, the weight of the silence behind me seemed to follow. No sounds of birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive quiet that hung in the air. As I drove down the long, winding road, I finally started to feel the tension in my shoulders release. The further I got, the more I felt like I could breathe again. I was almost to the main road when I passed a truck, a big, black truck that I hadn't seen on my way in. It didn't register at first, but then I saw the man standing by it. He was tall, with dark clothes and a grim expression. He didn't look at me, but I swear I felt his eyes on me. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just kept driving, not looking back. When I finally reached the main highway, I pulled into the nearest gas station, my hands shaking. I had to call the rental agency. They needed to know what happened. But when I tried to explain, the person on the other end of the phone sounded confused. No one was supposed to be out there. No one. They offered to send someone to check the cabin, but I didn't care. I was done. I was so done. I haven't gone back to that cabin. I haven't even been back to that area. I don't know who or what was out there. Maybe it was just someone else like me trying to get away from the world. Or maybe it was something else, something I don't want to think about. But whatever it was, I'm glad I'm far away from it. The woods may be beautiful, but they hold secrets. And some secrets are better left undisturbed. I had never felt as isolated as I did that day. It was meant to be a simple weekend hike, nothing too fancy. Just me, the trail, and the peace of being away from the noise of city life. I'd hiked in the woods before, many times in fact, but something about this trip felt different from the start. It was one of those overcast days where the clouds hung heavy in the sky, casting a dull gray light over the landscape. The air was cool, but not cold enough to be uncomfortable. I woke up that morning with the usual excitement of hitting the trail. It had been a few weeks since my last hike, and I was eager to get away from everything. I packed up my gear the night before: water, snacks, a map, first aid kit, and a few other essentials. The route I planned was a loop through a small part of the forest I'd never explored before. It was supposed to take a couple of hours, maybe 3. Easy enough for a solo trip. I wasn't worried about anything. I've done this kind of thing before. The trailhead was nearly empty when I arrived. There was a car parked off to the side, and I could tell it was an older vehicle that had been there for some time. I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone else was out there, but it was a vast forest, so it wasn't unusual to not run into anyone for hours. I shrugged it off and started walking. The first couple of miles went by without incident. The trees were thick here, their branches twisting together above to create a canopy that blocked out the sun entirely. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the trail, the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind, and the distant calls of birds. It was peaceful, exactly what I was looking for. The deeper I went into the forest, though, the more unsettling it started to feel. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on exactly. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me, and the sounds of the forest seemed to grow more distant. It's strange how quickly the world around you can shift from calm to eerie, and that's how it was. The woods weren't silent, but the noises were different, more muted, like the forest itself was holding its breath. By the time I reached the halfway point of the trail, I had begun to notice the absence of familiar signs. Normally, I'd expect to see a trail marker or maybe a stream, a small clearing, something that reassures you that you're on the right path. But here, there was nothing. The trail had become more difficult to follow, and it was hard to tell which way was which. I checked the map, but it was no help. The markings didn't match anything I was seeing. The trees looked the same in every direction, and I felt a flicker of doubt creep into my mind. I paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and tried to shake off the unease. It was just my mind playing tricks on me, nothing more. I kept walking, hoping to reach a familiar landmark, but nothing seemed to change. After another hour or so, the trail completely disappeared. The path that I had been following had dwindled into nothing, replaced by undergrowth and thick, tangled roots. I stopped, and for the first time I felt a rising panic. I should have turned back earlier, but now it felt too late. I pulled out my map again, but it wasn't much help. The trails I'd expected to follow weren't there anymore. The landmarks I had hoped to rely on seemed non-existent. I turned around, hoping to retrace my steps, but that only made things worse. Everything looked unfamiliar, and the trees seemed to loom over me, closing in from every side. I tried to stay calm. It wasn't unusual to get disoriented in a forest like this. I told myself to keep moving, to keep walking, and eventually, I would find my way out. But as the hours passed, the situation only seemed to worsen. It wasn't just the trail that had disappeared. The forest itself felt different, more oppressive. The sky was growing darker as the sun started to dip behind the clouds. I checked my watch, nearly 6 o'clock. I should have been out by now, but there was no sign of anything familiar. That's when I started to hear it. At first, it was subtle, just a faint rustling sound, like something moving through the brush. I paused, my heart skipping a beat. It was far enough away that I couldn't see what it was, but I could hear it. The sound was strange, unnatural. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate to be an animal. I stood still, straining my ears, but it stopped as suddenly as it had started. I took a step forward, trying to ignore the growing unease. The forest felt empty, too empty. There were no sounds now, no birds, no wind. Just the deafening silence and my own heartbeat. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something wasn't right. The wind picked up a little, blowing through the trees, but it didn't do much to calm my nerves. It only made the shadows between the trees seem longer, darker. I kept walking, but now I was aware of every snap of a twig underfoot, every rustle of leaves. The world felt as though it were holding its breath. By the time it was fully dark, I had no idea where I was. The light from my phone barely helped. I had no reception, of course, but I used it to light my way as I stumbled through the woods. I couldn't stop thinking about the rustling. Whatever it was, it wasn't natural. The noise had come from a place where there shouldn't have been anything. Too still, too quiet. Then it happened again. A distinct, deliberate sound. It was closer this time. I froze, gripping my phone tighter. I could hear it moving slowly, methodically. I tried to peer through the trees, but the darkness was thick. I felt the weight of something unseen, something watching me, even though I couldn't see it. My heart began to race. I had to get out of there. I took off running. I didn't care if I was heading in the right direction. I just needed to get away from whatever that sound was, away from the feeling that something was following me. I crashed through the underbrush, limbs and branches grabbing at me, but I didn't stop. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, the rustling sound was closer. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there. My breath was ragged, and my legs felt like they were going to give out. The ground beneath me shifted, the earth soft and uneven. I stumbled, catching myself just before I fell. Panic flooded my chest, and I forced myself to keep moving, but the exhaustion was setting in. I didn't know how much longer I could go on. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the sound stopped. The woods were silent again. No rustling, no footsteps, just the oppressive quiet. I stopped and listened. The weight of the silence felt suffocating, like something was waiting in the dark. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I couldn't wait to find out. I forced myself to keep moving, though now my thoughts were consumed with dread. I couldn't just keep running. I had to figure out where I was, or I'd end up in a worse situation. I decided to pause, collect myself, and try to find a way back. I found a small hill and climbed it, hoping for a better vantage point. And there, in the distance, I saw it. An outline of something in the dark, faint but unmistakable. It was a building, a cabin. I couldn't believe my eyes. A cabin? Here in the middle of nowhere? I didn't know if I should feel relieved or terrified, but it was a sign of civilization, something I could use. I moved toward it quickly, desperate. The cabin wasn't as far as I had expected. It only took a few minutes to reach it. I cautiously approached, unsure of who or what might be inside. The door was slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to go in or not. But then, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was empty, abandoned. The air was stale, but at least there was shelter. The walls were covered in dust, and everything seemed old, really old. The furniture was covered in sheets, but it was safe. I closed the door behind me, locking it. For the first time in hours, I felt my heart slow down. I sat on the floor, leaned against the wall, and tried to catch my breath. I didn't know who had built this cabin or how it had come to be here, but I knew one thing. I wasn't alone in the woods anymore. I had found my way out. The cabin wasn't much, but it was a lifeline. As the night stretched on, I realized how lucky I was to have found it. The storm that came through later only confirmed it. The rain came down hard, soaking everything outside, but I was dry, safe, and finally able to relax. In the morning, when the storm cleared and the sun returned, I left the cabin, taking one last look before heading back toward the trailhead. The forest seemed different now, not quite as oppressive as it had the night before. And when I finally made it back to the parking area, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I was done. I'll never know who built that cabin or how it ended up in the middle of nowhere, but I was thankful for it. It was my salvation, my refuge in the chaos. Sometimes, it's the little things that keep us going, the ones we least expect. I had always been someone who enjoyed the quiet, isolated corners of the world. It was peaceful to me to leave the noise of the city behind and find a place where the only sounds were the wind through the trees and the crunch of gravel beneath my boots. So when I found an old, barely used hiking trail tucked away in a remote part of the country, I thought I had found the perfect spot for a weekend getaway. The trail was supposed to lead to an old cabin. Nothing fancy, just a place for hikers to rest and take shelter from the elements. I figured it would be a good chance to test my skills, maybe learn something about myself. There was no one around for miles, and that was exactly what I wanted. I packed my bag, grabbed my gear, and drove out to the trailhead. The road leading up to the trail was barely paved, more like a dirt path than anything. I could feel the bump of the tires on the uneven surface as I slowly made my way through the woods. It was late afternoon when I arrived, the sun starting to dip lower in the sky. The air was cool, crisp, perfect for a hike. I parked my car at the trailhead and took one last look at the road behind me. There was no sign of life, just the trees swaying gently in the wind and the distant sound of birds. I grabbed my backpack, made sure I had everything: water, snacks, a map of the area, and started down the trail. The first mile was easy, a slight incline with trees on either side. The trail was well marked, and I didn't feel concerned at first. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting long shadows on the ground. I could hear my footsteps, rhythmic and steady, crunching against the dirt. But as I continued, the trail began to get steeper, and the trees grew thicker. The sunlight faded, and the shadows deepened. The wind picked up, and the forest started to feel different, darker, colder, as if the world had closed in around me. I glanced down at my map. The cabin was supposed to be just a few more miles ahead. According to the guide, it wasn't hard to find. But the further I walked, the less sure I felt. The trees seemed to lean in closer, the path becoming narrower and more overgrown. The silence was unsettling. It wasn't just quiet, it was an oppressive silence. No birds, no rustling animals, nothing. By the time I reached what I thought was the halfway point, I realized something was wrong. The trail had started to disappear. At first, I thought maybe I had missed a turn, but the map didn't show any other routes. I stopped and scanned the area around me. There was no sign of the path, just dense trees and undergrowth. The sunlight was barely filtering through anymore, and I could feel the temperature drop. I tried to backtrack, but the trees and the thick brush made it difficult to retrace my steps. It felt like the forest was closing in on me, pushing me deeper into it. The longer I wandered, the more disoriented I became. The map didn't make sense. The landmarks didn't match what I was seeing. Every direction looked the same. Dense woods, no sign of a trail, and no cabin in sight. Panic started to creep in, but I pushed it back. I knew better than to lose my cool in situations like this. I focused on staying calm, remembering what I had learned about staying oriented in the wilderness. I found a small clearing and sat down for a moment to gather my thoughts. The cold air made my breath visible, but I didn't mind it. I pulled out my water bottle and took a long drink. I needed to think. I realized that I had been walking for hours now, and the sky was starting to darken. There was no sign of the cabin, no indication that I was on the right path. I felt stupid. How had I gotten so lost? I had done everything by the book. Checked the map, kept track of time, but somewhere, something had gone wrong. I decided to head in what I hoped was the right direction, just to see if I could pick up the trail again. I needed to find some sort of landmark, a hill, a rock, anything. But the forest was endless, with no sign of anything other than trees and brush. The more I walked, the more I started to doubt myself. Was I going in the right direction? Should I just stop and wait for someone to find me? But that thought terrified me. I didn't know how long it would take for someone to realize I was missing. I had to keep moving. I couldn't afford to just wait around. By the time the sun had set, the forest was almost completely dark. My flashlight was weak, its beam barely cutting through the blackness around me. I knew I needed to find shelter, but I had no idea where to go. There were no signs of civilization, no roads, no lights, just the oppressive darkness and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. I eventually stumbled upon a small, weathered shack. It wasn't much, a simple wooden structure that looked like it had been abandoned for years. It didn't look like the cabin I had been searching for, but it was something. I didn't have much of a choice. I approached it cautiously, checking to make sure there were no dangerous animals inside. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside was empty, save for some old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. It was better than being out in the cold, so I decided to settle in for the night. I locked the door behind me and curled up on the floor, using my jacket as a blanket. The wind howled outside, but I felt a little safer inside the shack, even if it wasn't much of a shelter. I was exhausted, but sleep didn't come easily. Every little sound made me tense up. The creak of the shack's wood settling, the rustling of leaves outside. My mind raced, and I kept replaying the events of the day. How had I gotten so lost? What had happened to the trail? Why was I so deep in the woods with no sign of help? Eventually, I must have drifted off, but my sleep was restless. I kept waking up, startled by noises outside or the feeling of being watched. The night dragged on, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When the first light of morning broke through the cracks in the walls, I was up and moving. I didn't want to waste any more time. I needed to get out of the woods and find my way back to civilization. I grabbed my bag, checked my supplies, water, snacks, and set out once again. The forest looked different in the daylight, less menacing but still confusing. I had no idea where I was going, but I figured I couldn't get any more lost than I already was. I kept walking, hoping that eventually I'd find a road or a sign of life. Hours passed, and just as I was starting to lose hope, I saw something in the distance. A clearing, a break in the trees. My heart raced as I pushed through the underbrush, desperate to reach it. When I finally emerged into the open, I couldn't believe my eyes. There, in front of me, was the cabin I had been searching for. It was exactly where the map had said it would be. I stood there for a moment, taking it in. It was a small, rustic building, but it was real, and it was a sign that I had made it through the woods. I approached the cabin cautiously, my nerves still frayed from the night I'd spent in the shack, but there was no sign of danger. The door to the cabin was unlocked, and I stepped inside, grateful to finally be somewhere safe. The cabin was basic, but it was a shelter, and for that I was thankful. I spent the next few hours taking stock of my situation, trying to calm down and regain some sense of normalcy. I wasn't sure how I had ended up in the wrong part of the woods, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to take the wilderness for granted again. After a while, I made my way back to the trailhead, retracing my steps as best as I could. The journey was long, but I finally reached my car. My hands were shaking from the strain of the past 2 days, but I was alive, and that was all that mattered. Looking back at the woods one last time, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and unease. I had gotten out, but I had learned a valuable lesson. The woods weren't just a place of peace and quiet. They were wild, unpredictable, and you couldn't always trust your map. Sometimes you had to trust yourself. And if I ever went back, I would be ready for whatever the forest had in store. I was in the middle of nowhere. No cell service, no roads, just dense woods stretching as far as I could see. It had been a spontaneous decision, a weekend getaway to escape the noise of the city. I'd heard about a remote cabin on an old hiking trail that was supposed to be peaceful, just perfect for clearing my head. The kind of place that seemed to promise a break from the chaos of everyday life. But as soon as I started the hike toward it, I began to feel something wasn't quite right. The cabin wasn't far off, a couple of miles or so I thought, but the path wound through trees so thick that I could barely see ahead of me. It was quiet, not the calm quiet I had hoped for, but an unsettling silence that seemed to close in on me with every step I took. I brushed it off at first, told myself it was just the isolation, that I was overthinking things. But then there was the sound, the kind of soft rustling that didn't come from the wind. It was like something was moving nearby, just out of sight. I stopped, listening hard. The rustling stopped too. A chill crept down my spine, and for a second, I wasn't sure if I should keep going. But then I told myself it was just the wind. I pushed ahead. The trail wasn't well marked. Overgrown in places, it looked like no one had bothered with it in years. I had to step over rocks, branches, and fallen trees, each step growing more difficult. My legs were starting to ache, but I had come this far. I couldn't just turn back now. The cabin wasn't far. I repeated that to myself over and over. When I finally saw the cabin, it was smaller than I'd imagined. It looked run down, but still intact. Old wooden walls, a roof covered with moss. There were no other cabins nearby, no signs of life. Just the desolate stillness of the woods around me. My stomach churned as I walked toward it, an odd sense of dread settling in my chest. Inside, it was just as I had expected, dark and musty. The smell of old wood and dust in the air. The windows were boarded up and the furniture was minimal. An old couch, a table, and a few chairs. A fireplace stood at one end, but there was no firewood to light it with. I set my bag down, the silence pressing in from all sides. I spent the first few hours unpacking and settling in. I kept my things close, not wanting to wander too far. The thought of leaving the cabin even for a short while made me uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about this place. As the evening came, the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the cabin. I sat by the window, staring out into the thickening woods. I could still hear that rustling sound, faint but persistent. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something bigger like a bear. But the more I listened, the more it sounded off, too deliberate, too constant. Like whatever it wasn't moving in the usual way. My mind began to race. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just jumpy from being alone in the woods, far from any real help. But the rustling persisted, moving closer. At some point, I thought I heard a low thud, like something heavy hitting the ground. It was close, very close, and it made my heart race in a way that felt primal. Like some part of me knew I wasn't alone. I stood, my legs shaky as I moved to the door. I had to know what it was. I couldn't just sit in there, waiting for something I couldn't understand to happen. I opened the door slowly, stepping outside onto the porch. The woods were dark now, and I could barely see a few feet in front of me. The rustling had stopped, and the silence felt deafening. For a long time, I stood there, straining my ears. Then I heard it again, a soft, almost imperceptible scraping sound, as if something was dragging itself across the ground. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't explain it, but there was something in the sound that felt wrong. I didn't want to go searching for it. I didn't want to see what was out there, but I couldn't stay in the cabin either, not when every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and stepped off the porch, the beam of light flickering in the darkness. I walked slowly, my footsteps careful, listening intently. The sound grew louder, closer. It wasn't animal, it was something else. Something human. It was dragging its body through the underbrush. My throat tightened, and I almost turned back, but curiosity, or maybe sheer fear, kept me going. I followed the sound until it led me to a clearing. The beam of my flashlight danced over the trees, the undergrowth, and the shadows in between. At the far edge of the clearing, there was something, a shape. I froze, heart thundering in my chest. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a person, bent over, crawling through the dirt. The flashlight's beam caught their face. It was a man, his face covered in dirt, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring directly at me. I backed away, my breath catching in my throat. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. And then, as if sensing my hesitation, the man turned his head toward me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Only the rasping sound of breath, shallow and broken. He crawled forward, dragging himself with a desperation that made my stomach turn. I had never felt more terrified in my life. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to get out of there, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the sight of him, the strange, silent way he moved. It took every ounce of strength to turn and run. I didn't stop until I was back at the cabin, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely lock it. I didn't know what was out there or what had just happened, but I wasn't staying to find out. I spent the rest of the night inside, every creak and groan of the old building making me jump. I kept my flashlight close, too scared to even think about sleeping. When morning finally came, I didn't wait for the sun to fully rise. I grabbed my things, packed as quickly as I could, and left. The whole time, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that man crawling toward me again. I made it back to the trailhead, my heart still pounding, but when I finally got to my car, I breathed a sigh of relief. The woods behind me felt like a different world, one I was glad to leave behind. It wasn't until I returned home, safe and sound, that I realized just how close I had come to something I didn't understand. The whole trip had felt off, but I had dismissed it as my imagination running wild. Maybe I was just overthinking it, but the man crawling in the dirt, there was no way that was a coincidence. I don't know what he was doing in those woods, or how he had gotten there. I don't know why he was crawling or what had happened to him. But I'll tell you this, I'm never going back to those woods. Whatever it was that was out there, I'm done with it. Some places are meant to be left alone, and some things are better off unexplained. I don't know if I'll ever really understand what happened, but I'm just grateful I made it out in one piece. The memory of that man's eyes still haunts me, though, and sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear the faintest sound, like something dragging itself across the floor. But I don't go looking for answers anymore. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. I had always thought I was good at being alone. Spending time in nature, getting away from it all was something I treasured. I grew up in a small town, surrounded by woods and mountains, and as an adult, I found peace in going on solo hikes. But this time, things were different. Started like any other trip, really. I packed my usual gear: a tent, sleeping bag, extra clothes, and enough food to last me a couple of days. I had a map, though I didn't expect to need it much. The plan was simple: hike through the forest, set up camp by the river, and enjoy the quiet of being completely isolated for a few days. The hike to my destination was smooth, and the weather was perfect, cool with a gentle breeze and the sun shining through the trees. I moved at my own pace, taking breaks whenever I felt like it, sipping water, and enjoying the sounds of the forest. Birds were chirping, leaves rustling in the wind, and the occasional crack of a branch underfoot made everything feel peaceful. By the time I reached my camp spot, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I set up my tent next to the river, the sound of the flowing water a soothing backdrop to my efforts. I took my time to get everything just right, arranging my gear and setting up my campfire. The sun was nearly gone by the time I finished, and the light was beginning to fade fast. I ate my dinner by the fire, the crackling of the wood mixing with the gurgling river. It was calm, tranquil, exactly how I liked it. As the night wore on, I found myself watching the stars, enjoying the silence. The only sounds were the river, the wind, and the occasional rustle in the bushes behind me. I didn't think much of it at first, probably just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. I finished my food and sat there for a while, listening. The silence had settled in again, but this time, it felt a little thicker, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, but I shrugged it off. It was probably just the woods playing tricks on my mind. It's easy to feel that way when you're out there, alone in the dark. Eventually, I decided to turn in for the night. I zipped up my tent and crawled into my sleeping bag. The fire had burned down to embers, and the only light now came from the faint glow of the stars above. The river's steady rush was comforting, and I closed my eyes, trying to block out the creeping feeling that something was off. It wasn't long before I heard it, a sound that broke the rhythm of the night. A twig snapped. It wasn't far from the tent, just outside. My heart skipped a beat. I lay still, straining to hear any other sounds, but there was nothing. I told myself it was just another animal, maybe a squirrel or a rabbit. It wasn't anything to worry about. But then I heard another snap, and another. This time it was closer. I sat up, my heart pounding. The rustling sound was coming from just outside my tent, as if something was walking around it. I held my breath, listening carefully. Could still be an animal, but this felt different. There was something deliberate about it, like it was circling, taking its time. It wasn't just a random noise. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. I pointed it at the opening of the tent, but saw nothing. The forest was silent again. I held the light steady, scanning the trees around me, but nothing moved. I forced myself to breathe, trying to calm down. It was just an animal, I thought. Maybe a bear or something. I had heard that they sometimes roam through the area, especially at night. Still, my mind raced. The sounds from outside my tent didn't feel like they came from an animal. I spent the next few hours wide awake, listening to every rustle and crack in the forest. Each sound sent my nerves into overdrive. I didn't dare leave the tent. Felt like something or someone was out there waiting, watching. I didn't know what it was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted. At some point, I must have drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, the sun had just started to rise, and the forest around me was bathed in soft golden light. I got up, stretched, and unzipped the tent, stepping outside. The air was cool, and the smell of damp earth filled my lungs. Everything looked normal. The campfire had burned out overnight, and the river was still rushing past. But when I looked around, I noticed something strange. The ground near the edge of my tent was disturbed. There were deep, uneven tracks in the dirt, like something heavy had been walking around. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The tracks weren't from an animal. They were too big, too deliberate. They seemed to circle the tent, just like the rustling I had heard the night before. I followed the trail with my eyes, and my gaze landed on a large rock nearby. There, sitting on the rock, was a piece of cloth, a scrap of something torn, stained, and weathered by time. I moved closer, my heart pounding in my chest. I picked it up carefully. It was old, torn at the edges, and dirty. I could barely make out what it had once been, a shirt or jacket, maybe. But what struck me was the unmistakable scent that wafted off it. It was something rancid, something decayed, like it had been left out in the woods for a long time. I dropped it as if it had burned me. My mind raced. Someone had been here, not just anyone, a person. I wasn't alone out here. I grabbed my pack, shoved everything into it, and didn't waste any more time. I didn't care to finish my trip or find out who or what had been circling my camp the night before. I just wanted to get out of there. I hurried along the trail, my eyes scanning every tree and shadow, my ears straining for any sign of movement. I wasn't sure what I was afraid of, but the fear was real. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, and I wasn't about to ignore them. The path out seemed endless. My legs ached. My heart pounded, but I kept going, not stopping for anything. The woods felt heavier now, darker even though the sun was high in the sky. Every rustle, every crack of a twig made me jump. I kept expecting someone to step out from behind the trees, to confront me, but no one ever did. It took hours to make it back to the trailhead. By the time I saw the familiar road, I was completely drained. I had never been so relieved to see civilization. I didn't speak to anyone when I reached the parking lot. I just loaded my gear into my car and drove straight back home, not once looking in the rearview mirror. I never went back to those woods. I don't know who or what was out there with me, but I wasn't about to find out. It wasn't until later that I realized how close I had come to something dangerous. That scrap of cloth, the strange tracks, the sounds in the night. It all pointed to one thing. Someone had been watching me. But why? I don't know, and I don't care to find out. I still go on hikes, but I never venture far into the woods anymore. And I'll never again ignore that feeling of being watched. Sometimes, when I'm out in the quiet of nature, I can still hear that faint rustle in the distance. But I never stay to listen. I know now that not all things in the woods are meant to be understood. And sometimes, it's better to just walk away and never look back. I've always been someone who enjoyed a little solitude, which is why I decided to spend a weekend alone in a cabin up in the woods. The kind of place where you don't hear anything except the wind and the occasional rustle of leaves. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just nature. It was supposed to be a break from the hustle of daily life, a way to reset and clear my mind. But things didn't go as planned. I found the cabin after some searching on an old, rural website. It was nestled deep in the forest, far from civilization, and the description sounded perfect. A small, rustic wooden cabin with a fireplace, a few basic amenities, and a porch with a view of the surrounding wilderness. It was more than what I could have asked for, and I was excited to disconnect completely. The drive there was long. I left in the early morning, and by the time I reached the end of the paved road, the sky had already turned gray, and the sun was beginning to dip low. The last few miles were on a rough, dirt path that wound through the trees. I hadn't seen another vehicle for miles, and it felt like I was entering a place untouched by time. I pulled up in front of the cabin, the small structure barely visible through the thick forest around it. The place looked just like the photos, old but well kept. The wood was weathered but solid, and the chimney had a faint trail of smoke rising from it. The whole scene gave off an eerie, almost cinematic vibe, but I didn't think much of it at the time. After unloading my gear, I settled inside. The cabin was exactly what I expected. Small, but cozy. A wood-burning stove, a couple of chairs, a table, and a bed with a thick quilt. I got the fire going, and the warmth quickly made the place feel like home. The sun had set by the time I finished setting up, and the darkness outside was almost absolute, except for the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the trees. I spent the evening reading, enjoying the silence, and letting myself sink into the solitude. But as the night wore on, I started to feel something. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More like an uneasy feeling that I was being watched. But when I turned around, there was nothing but the flickering firelight. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the isolation getting to me. Around midnight, I decided to turn in. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, and I quickly drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping and the soft rustling of wind in the trees. The sun was already up, streaming through the gaps in the wood, casting long shadows on the floor. I stretched, feeling refreshed, and decided to take a walk around the property. There was a small trail that led deeper into the woods, and I followed it for a while, enjoying the crisp morning air and the solitude. The trail seemed to go on forever, winding through the thick trees, with no other signs of human life. The further I walked, the more I felt a sense of isolation. It was peaceful, yes, but also unsettling. It felt like I was on the edge of the world, with nothing but wilderness around me. I wandered for hours, not paying attention to the time, until I finally came across a clearing. At first, it seemed like just another open space in the woods, But then I noticed something odd. In the center of the clearing was an old, weathered stone well. It was covered in moss, and the stones looked like they had been there for decades, maybe longer. The well seemed out of place, like it didn't belong in this part of the forest. Curiosity got the best of me, and I approached it. The stone was cool under my fingers as I leaned over the edge, peering down into the dark opening. I couldn't see anything at first, just darkness. But then, as my eyes adjusted, I thought I saw something moving at the bottom. I blinked, unsure if I was imagining it. The forest was still, and the breeze had died down, leaving an uncomfortable silence. I stepped back, shaking off the feeling, and turned to leave. That's when I heard it. A soft rustling noise, like footsteps in the leaves. But there was no one around. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned in a circle, trying to locate the source of the sound. Nothing, just the trees and the breeze. I didn't want to stick around to figure it out, so I hurried back to the cabin. The feeling of being watched was even stronger now, and I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. That evening, I decided to stay inside, reading and keeping the fire going. As the night fell, the shadows grew longer and the air colder. I locked the door behind me, more out of instinct than any real concern. But as the night wore on, I kept hearing strange noises from outside, branches snapping, something moving through the trees. It sounded like footsteps, but I was sure there was no one else around. The silence was overwhelming, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, but I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of a loud bang coming from outside. My heart raced as I sat up, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it an animal or something worse? I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the door. My hands were shaking as I twisted the handle and stepped outside. The cold air hit me like a slap to the face, and the light from the flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees. The noise had stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I circled the cabin, checking every corner, but there was nothing. Just the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional distant animal call. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being so small and vulnerable in this vast, empty wilderness. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept the fire going and stayed on edge, listening to every creak and groan of the cabin as the wind picked up. By morning, I was exhausted, but I tried to brush it off. I packed up my things and decided to leave, telling myself it was just my nerves playing tricks on me. I drove down the rough dirt path, but as I reached the end of the road where the pavement began, something made me stop. I looked back at the cabin, barely visible through the trees. For a moment, I saw something in the window, a shadow, just for a second. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't know what it was, but in that moment I understood. Something was out there in the woods watching. I wasn't alone, not really. I didn't have to see it to know it was there, lurking in the forest, waiting. I left that place and I didn't go back. I'm not sure if I'll ever really understand what happened, but I know one thing for sure. Sometimes, being alone in the middle of nowhere isn't peaceful. It's terrifying. I had no business being here. I knew that much from the moment I made the turn onto the old dirt road. The kind of road you don't see in the city. The kind of road that seemed to be swallowed by the forest, with trees pressing in on either side like they were trying to block me from turning back. But I was already too deep into the trip to turn around. It had started as an innocent enough idea, a weekend getaway to some cabin I found online. Something remote, secluded, where I could just get away from it all.
No fones, no internet, no distractions.
Just me, the woods, and the sound of nature. I had a vague idea of where the cabin was supposed to be. The GPS was acting up. No surprise there. being so far off the beaten path, but it kept insisting I take this dirt road, telling me I was almost there. The cabin was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, nestled in the mountains. The photos online made it look perfect, surrounded by thick forest and a quiet, serene lake. It was supposed to be a simple escape from the stress of city life. But now, with every bump in the road, I felt less and less sure about this decision. The road stretched on, winding through the trees in a way that felt deliberate, like the forest was slowly swallowing me whole. My car was the only one on the road. Not a single soul around for miles. Not a house, not a shop, just trees. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The sort of smell that told you this place hadn't been disturbed by human hands in a long time. I didn't even think to check the weather before heading out, but now the sky was thickening, clouds rolling in like they were part of some bigger plan to keep me trapped here. A few raindrops hit the windshield. Nothing big, but enough to make the road slick and dangerous. I gripped the wheel a little tighter, my eyes scanning the road ahead, looking for any sign that I was nearing the cabin. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I drove deeper into the forest. It felt like I was the only person left in the world. Even the birds had stopped singing. I rolled down my window, hoping to catch a breeze, but all I got was the dense, heavy air of the woods. There was no turning back now. I told myself that, even though a small part of me wondered if I should have called it quits and found a hotel in the nearest town. I rounded a bend in the road, and then there it was, the cabin. It stood at the edge of a small clearing, looking like something straight out of an old survivalist movie. It was made of rough-hewn logs, the wood darkened with age, and the roof was a simple slant, covered in moss and patches of lichen. There were no neighbors, no signs of life, just trees, dirt, and the cabin. I parked my car, the engine sputtering as it came to a stop. The cabin looked just like the pictures, though the reality of it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was something off about it. It wasn't the kind of place that made you feel welcome. It was more like a place that made you feel like you were trespassing, even if you technically weren't. I grabbed my bag and stepped out of the car. The air was colder than I expected, and I shivered slightly. My footsteps crunched against the gravel driveway as I made my way up the small path to the door. The front porch had a couple of chairs, but they were covered in a layer of moss, as though no one had sat in them for years. I fumbled with the lock, and after a few seconds, the door creaked open. Inside, the cabin was just as you'd expect. There was a small living room with an old wood-burning stove, a few mismatched chairs, and a simple wooden table. The place felt lived in but not recently. Dust covered every surface, and the smell of mildew hung thick in the air. The kind of musty smell you get when something hasn't been used in ages. I set my bag down on the floor and went to open a window, but as I did, I noticed something strange. The window wasn't dirty. It wasn't just dust on the glass. It looked like someone had deliberately smeared something on the outside. Something red. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but it made my stomach twist. I wiped at the glass with my sleeve, trying to get a better look. That's when I saw it. Handprints. Streaks of red, smeared across the window. They were too big to be from an animal. Too deliberate to be some random mark left by nature. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at it. My heart pounded in my chest, and I had the sudden, overwhelming urge to just leave. But I couldn't. I was already here, and I couldn't let some strange handprints scare me away. I forced myself to turn away from the window and look around the rest of the cabin. I checked the kitchen, which was simple but functional, and the tiny bathroom. The place was older than I expected, but it had everything I needed. I figured I could shake off the feeling that something was wrong and settle in for the night. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the trees outside. I went to the stove and started a small fire, feeling the warmth spread through the cabin. The rain had picked up outside, tapping against the roof like 1,000 little feet. It was the perfect kind of night for staying in, reading a book, and just relaxing. But as the fire crackled, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was a quiet, oppressive kind of loneliness, a sense that there was something in the forest watching me, just out of sight. Every sound outside seemed louder than normal. The wind in the trees, the rain, even the occasional rustle of animals in the underbrush. I tried to push the feeling away, but it clung to me like the dampness in the air. I sat in the chair, staring into the fire, the flickering light dancing across the room. Every now and then, I would hear a noise, a branch snapping, a twig breaking, the sound of something moving around outside. I couldn't help myself. I stood up and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. All I could see were the trees, their branches swaying in the wind. But the darkness felt wrong. It was like the forest was closing in around me, the shadows deeper than they should be. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt thick with it. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to go outside for a quick walk. Maybe some fresh air would clear my head. I grabbed my jacket, stepped outside, and made my way down the small path leading into the forest. The ground was soft beneath my boots, the leaves slick with moisture. I walked for what felt like a while, trying to shake the unease gnawing at my gut. But the deeper I went into the woods, the more I felt it. The feeling that I was being followed. First, I thought it was my imagination, but then I heard it, footsteps, soft but unmistakable. I spun around, but there was nothing there. No one, just the trees. I quickened my pace, turning back toward the cabin, my heart pounding. The footsteps kept pace with me, just behind. Every time I turned, there was nothing, but the sound didn't stop. The air seemed to grow colder, heavier, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Finally, I reached the cabin, bursting through the door and slamming it behind me. I leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. I was shaking now, my mind racing, but the sound of footsteps had stopped. For now, I didn't sleep much that night. The fire had burned low, and the silence of the cabin seemed to press in on me. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind outside made me jump. It was a long night, but by morning, I was exhausted. I made a quick breakfast, packed my bag, and decided it was time to go. I didn't care about the cost of the cabin or what anyone might think. I just needed to get out of there. I started the car and drove away, the wheels spinning on the dirt road. The further I went, the more I felt the tension leave my body. The trees thinned out, and I finally saw the first sign of civilization, a road sign pointing to the nearest town. But just before I reached the highway, I noticed something, a figure standing at the edge of the woods. It was far off in the distance, but I could still make out the shape of a person. They were watching me. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just drove. And when I finally got to the town, I never went back to that cabin. I never even found out who else had been out there. But sometimes, when I think about it, I wonder if I was ever truly alone out there in the woods. It was supposed to be a simple trip. Just me, the open road, and a cabin hidden somewhere in the middle of nowhere. A getaway from the noise, the stress, and the people. The kind of retreat where you don't have to explain yourself, where you can just breathe. I had rented this cabin for a weekend. The owner, an older man with a thick beard, had given me directions that were vague at best. "Follow the road until it ends," he'd said with a weird smile that I couldn't quite place. "Can't miss it. Just keep your eyes peeled for the old pine tree. You'll know you're close when you see it." I wasn't really concerned. After all, how hard could it be to find a cabin in the woods? Plus, I wanted the isolation. No distractions, no interruptions, just me and the wild. I packed my car, a simple hatchback with just enough room for my gear. A few days worth of food, water, my sleeping bag, and the camping stove I wasn't sure I'd need. It was a 2-hour drive from the nearest town, but the road quickly turned into a narrow, winding path the moment I left the pavement behind. The trees crowded in around me, their dark shadows stretching long across the road, making everything feel even more remote. I tried not to think about how quiet it was. No traffic, no other cars, just the soft hum of my engine as I kept going. The farther I drove, the more my phone lost service, the signal fading until it was gone completely. A little unsettling, maybe, but not enough to make me want to turn back. Eventually, the road did end. True to the old man's directions, I came to a spot where the gravel turned to dirt and the path narrowed, winding between towering pines that seemed to close in around me. I could barely make out the shape of the cabin in the distance through the trees. It looked more like a small, weathered shack than anything you'd expect for a rental. I parked my car near a makeshift clearing, the gravel crunching under my tires as I stepped out. The air smelled fresh, pine and dirt, but there was something else too, something I couldn't put my finger on. I grabbed my bag and started walking toward the cabin, careful not to trip over the uneven ground. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and I took a deep breath as I stepped inside. The cabin was simple, barely furnished, with a small stove in the corner, a couple of chairs, and a thin mattress on the bed. The windows were covered with heavy curtains that blocked out most of the light, and the only sound in the place was the soft wind rustling through the trees outside. I took a seat by the window and looked out, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. For the first time in a while, I felt like I could actually relax. There was no one to talk to, no one to bother me, just the quiet of the woods and the sound of the wind. I thought about the hike I was going to take the next day, exploring the forest, maybe finding a stream or a quiet spot to sit. But as I looked out over the land surrounding the cabin, a strange feeling started to creep over me. It wasn't fear exactly, but a sense of something being off. The trees were thick, and the land felt unnaturally still. It was too quiet, almost as if the world itself was holding its breath. I tried to push the thought out of my mind and settled in for the night. There was nothing to fear here, just me, the cabin, and the woods. But when the sun set and the shadows lengthened, something strange happened. The cabin seemed to shift. The temperature dropped, and the air turned thick, like something was pressing down from above. I chalked it up to the cold, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. I spent the rest of the evening trying to distract myself, watching the fire crackle in the small stove, reading a book I had brought along, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was too quiet. The woods had gone completely still. No animals, no wind, nothing. At some point, I decided to call it a night. The bed was hard, but it was fine. I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. The unease that had been creeping around the edges of my thoughts all day had grown into something much stronger. It wasn't the usual feeling of being alone in the wilderness. It was something else, something darker. I shifted under the blanket, glancing toward the window. The trees outside were swaying, their branches scratching against the glass like fingers tapping on the wall. I shut my eyes, trying to push it out of my mind, but the sound kept coming over and over again. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the cabin. I shot up, heart racing, eyes wide. I had no idea what had caused it, but it was impossible to ignore. I grabbed the flashlight by the bedside table and crept toward the door. The wind had picked up again, howling through the trees, but it wasn't just the wind I was hearing. There was something else out there, something moving. I held my breath, trying to listen, but everything was drowned out by the noise of the storm. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, scanning the woods. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but all I could see was the forest, silent and still. I decided to stay inside the cabin for the rest of the night, but as I lay there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every creak of the wood, every whisper of the wind made me jump. Morning finally came and I was exhausted. I hadn't slept at all. I pulled myself out of bed and forced myself to eat something. Anything to get through the day. I couldn't stay cooped up in the cabin forever. I needed to get out and clear my head. I set out for a hike in the woods, hoping it would help shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. The woods were dense, with towering trees that blocked out much of the light, making it feel like twilight even though the sun was high in the sky. I followed a narrow trail that wound its way through the thick undergrowth, the crunch of dry leaves underfoot the only sound I could hear. As I walked deeper into the woods, the silence returned, settling over me like a heavy blanket. I felt like I was being watched. My skin prickled, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone lurking just out of sight. The trail eventually opened up to a small clearing, and for a moment, I thought I had escaped the oppressive silence. But then I saw it, an old, weathered fence running through the middle of the clearing. It was made of rough wood, the posts twisted and broken, like it had been there for years, maybe decades. The gate hung off its hinges, swaying gently in the breeze. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. Something about that fence, that gate, felt wrong. As I got closer, I noticed something else. There were fresh tracks in the dirt, large, deep impressions as if something or someone had been here recently. My mind raced. I wanted to turn around to go back to the safety of the cabin, but something held me in place. It was as if the clearing was drawing me in, pushing me toward the fence. I stepped over the broken gate and moved forward, unable to resist the pull of the strange place. The further I walked, the more uneasy I felt. The trees here were darker, their branches twisted in unnatural shapes. It felt like the woods themselves were closing in around me, suffocating me. And then I saw it. At first, it looked like just another tree, tall, thick, its bark rough and scarred. But as I stepped closer, I saw that there was something carved into it. Symbols, lines, shapes. It was almost like a warning. I touched the tree, and a cold chill ran down my spine. The symbols felt wrong, like they were alive, shifting beneath my fingers. I quickly pulled away, panic rising in my chest. I had to get out of here. I turned to leave, but something stopped me. There, just beyond the edge of the clearing, I saw a figure, tall, gaunt, its face hidden in shadow. It was standing perfectly still, watching me. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I turned and ran. I don't remember much after that. My heart was pounding so loud in my chest that I could barely hear my footsteps, but I didn't stop running. The trees blurred past me, the ground uneven beneath my feet, but I kept going until I reached the cabin. I locked the door behind me and collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. My body was shaking uncontrollably, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had seen. But as I sat there, the fear slowly started to fade. I was safe for now. The thing, whatever it was, hadn't followed me. I was back in the cabin, back where it was safe. I stayed inside the cabin for the rest of the weekend, not daring to go back into the woods. The unease never fully left me, but eventually, I left. I drove back home without looking back, knowing that whatever I had stumbled across in those woods, it was something I didn't need to understand. And as the road stretched out before me, I realized one thing. The woods weren't just a place to escape to. They were a place to escape from. I had always wanted to go on a solo hiking trip, far away from the noise of the city and the distractions of everyday life. Just the idea of being surrounded by nothing but trees, rocks, and dirt had always sounded peaceful to me. So when I finally got the chance, I decided to pack my backpack, grab my hiking boots, and head to a remote trail in the mountains. far off the beaten path, the kind of place where the nearest person could be miles away. I set off early in the morning, the sun just beginning to peek over the horizon. The trail was narrow, winding through dense woods, the kind where the trees seemed to close in on you as you walked. It was a beautiful, crisp autumn day, the kind where the air is cool enough to be refreshing, but the sun still carries some warmth. The leaves were in full color, reds and yellows splashing against the green of the trees. I was in my element. For hours, I kept walking, the trail twisting and turning as the terrain got more rugged. The path grew steeper, and the sound of birds and insects faded as I moved deeper into the woods. Eventually, I reached a spot where the trees opened up, revealing a small, clear stream running through the rocks. I decided to take a break, sitting on a large boulder near the water, the soft gurgling of the stream relaxing my mind. I refilled my water bottle, ate a quick snack, and continued on. The farther I went, the more remote it became. The trail, which had been well marked earlier, slowly started to disappear, and I found myself following nothing more than faint animal tracks through the underbrush. It didn't bother me. In fact, it felt more like an adventure. A part of me was glad to be away from everything. I enjoyed the solitude. As the day wore on, I began to realize that I hadn't seen anyone else on the trail. At first, I figured it was just because I was so far out, but as time passed, I started to wonder if anyone else ever ventured this far out into the wilderness. Still, I wasn't worried. I had plenty of food, water, and a good map. I had been hiking long enough to know what I was doing. But as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, something started to feel off. The woods were growing eerily quiet. The birds had stopped singing, and there was no wind rustling through the trees. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered, crawling under my skin like a chill I couldn't shake. The shadows were stretching long across the forest floor as the sun dipped lower. I had to make a decision. Either set up camp for the night, or push on and try to find my way back to the main trail. I didn't want to risk wandering off the path in the dark, so I decided to make camp. There was a small clearing nearby, and I set up my tent next to a large fallen tree. It wasn't until I was kneeling in my tent, adjusting my gear, that I realized something strange. There was no noise, not a single animal, not even the usual rustling of the leaves. The silence was deafening. It was the kind of silence that made your ears ring, the kind of silence that felt unnatural. I shook my head, telling myself I was just tired. It had been a long day of hiking. I made myself a quick meal over the small camp stove and tried to relax. But as the light of the evening faded and the darkness settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the feeling of unease kept growing stronger. My heart started to race. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing in the woods just outside my tent. But every time I looked, there was nothing. I lay down in my sleeping bag, trying to calm my nerves. The darkness outside seemed to grow thicker, pressing in on me. I couldn't remember ever feeling so alone in my life. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that this was just the fear of the unknown playing tricks on me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I tried to sleep, but sleep didn't come. The night dragged on, every creak of the trees, every snap of a twig, making my heart race. Then, just when I thought I might lose my mind, I heard it, a sound, a soft, slow rustling in the leaves just outside my tent. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It was the kind of sound an animal would make. Maybe a deer or a fox, but it was too deliberate, too slow, almost intentional. I held my breath, listening. The rustling continued, then stopped. For a few long seconds, there was nothing. Then a soft thud, followed by another and then a third. Something heavy was moving around my camp. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to look outside to see what it was, but the fear held me still. I couldn't bring myself to open the tent flap. Whatever it was, I didn't want to know. I tried to stay as still as possible, my breathing shallow. The sounds continued for what felt like hours, but when I dared to peek outside, I saw nothing. Just the same dark trees, swaying gently in the night breeze. I didn't know if it was the wind or if I had imagined the sounds, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I grabbed my pack and threw it on, my hands shaking. I wasn't staying another minute in that camp. I didn't care how dark it was. I didn't care if I got lost. I just wanted to get out of there. I packed up as quickly as I could, my movements jerky and frantic. The quiet around me was unnerving. I stepped out of the tent, the cool night air biting at my skin. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, scanning the area around me. There was nothing but the trees and the endless silence. I didn't waste time. I grabbed my map, found the nearest trail, and started walking. I kept my head down, only looking up occasionally to make sure I was on the right path. Every snap of a twig, every distant rustling made my heart jump in my chest. The darkness felt endless, and the woods seemed to close in on me, pushing me further into the unknown. I kept walking for what felt like hours, the cold seeping into my bones. The moon had risen, casting long shadows over the trail. I felt like I was walking in a nightmare, unable to wake up. Eventually, I found the main trail. I wasn't sure how long I had been walking, but the familiar markers on the trees gave me a sense of relief. I wasn't alone anymore. I followed the trail back, my feet aching, my body exhausted, but the fear was finally starting to fade. By the time I reached the main road, I was a mess. My clothes were dirty, my hands shaking from the adrenaline. I had no idea what had happened that night, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I flagged down the first car that passed, and within minutes, I was on my way back to civilization. It wasn't until much later that I learned the area I had been in was known for strange occurrences. People who had gone missing, hikers who had returned with unsettling stories, but no one could explain why. I didn't need to know. I had my own story to tell now, and it was one I didn't intend to repeat. I don't know what it was that night. Maybe it was just my nerves getting the better of me. Maybe it was something more, but I never went back to that trail, and I learned my lesson the hard way. Sometimes the middle of nowhere isn't as peaceful as it seems.